Now, I'll now go into virtualization. Okay, so we've discussed what SDN is, the architecture, its different parts. We've also discussed the protocol enabling SDN, which is OpenFlow. We've discussed also the different parts found in the OpenFlow switch. We'll now discuss virtualization. So this is a separate topic on its own, just to keep that in mind. No? So first off, what is virtualization? This is a technology that also relies on software to simulate hardware functionality. The byproduct of virtualization is to create virtual machines. Now, what are virtual machines? No? Think of virtual machines as sort of like a computer inside a computer. Okay, so all of us know that computers, whether it be desktops, laptops, or servers, no, it would have the hardware elements. It would also have an operating system, and that operating system is the one managing the applications inside the computer. So ganun yung parang layering niya. Okay. Once you implement virtualization, think of it na you have one physical device, but instead of it having only one operating system, it can have smaller computers running inside of it, and those smaller computers would have their own operating systems inside. So medyo ano siya, tawag dito, recursive, kumbaga, yung structuring niya. A PC inside a PC. That is what virtualization is about. And why do we even implement virtualization in the first place? Well, if we're going to boil it down, no, it still is in a matter of cost implications, no, coming from the industry. Say you are an organization and you want to install your own web server. Without virtualization, you have to have a dedicated hardware with its own operating system for you to host your server. Ganun po siya. Okay? If say you want a database and say assuming that database does not support or is not compatible with the existing web server that you have no choice but to install or to build another dedicated server that would support your database. So now, for the record, meron ka ng dalawang physical servers doon. Each of them would have their own operating system supporting a unique service. Okay, this was back then. Now, virtualization can save up on installing more hardware by maximizing the already existing hardware that you have. So given my example a while ago, na meron kang dalawang servers, each of them would have their own operating system, whereby you will now install your web server and your database on two separate machines. Why not have it as one physical server? You only install one, but inside it, you can install two separate operating systems running concurrently, hosting your two separate applications. You can do so through virtualization. Okay? So, having said that, no, there are, as I mentioned a while ago, no, when I introduced the course, and this is also what you'll be encountering later on, no, in the course, we have different types of virtualization. In fact, think of any resource that you have in your computing system. Chances are it can already be virtualized. Okay? So, the one that you are seeing here in the slide right now, no, this can actually be categorized by either the virtualization is driven by hardware or software. Now, I got this from IBM. This is their definition of the different types of virtualization technologies available nowadays. No? Now, hardware speaking, you have data center virtualization, network virtualization, CPU virtualization, storage, GPU, no? And even cloud computing. While for software-driven, you have Linux virtualization, application virtualization, data virtualization, desktop virtualization. The type of virtualization that I'm talking about a while ago, na meron kang server and that server is able to support more than two or more than one operating system running at any given time, is called CPU or compute virtualization. This is the fundamental technology that makes hypervisors, virtual machines, operating systems possible. If I'm going to put here SDN in the picture, and if I'm being forced to say na ano nga ba ang virtualization technology supporting SDN, although technically you can have SDN even without virtualization, you can do so through network virtualization, wherein it abstracts hardware elements and functions and turns them into software running on a hypervisor. So majority or based on what we can see in the industry nowadays, no, some providers have SDN enabled through network virtualization. In other words, they can have the controller, the SDN controller, implemented as a virtual machine, no? And that virtual machine is controlling not physical switches, but virtual switches. So the one responsible for creating virtual switches is network virtualization. Okay? With me so far? So, meron na tayong dalawang klaseng virtualization dito na din discuss, no? So, but the one that I am talking about here is mostly compute virtualization. Okay? Now, you may have also noticed here dito sa ano ko, sa table ko, no? Or rather in the diagram here, that why is it that cloud computing is a mixture of hardware and software-driven virtualization? Well, this one I have to argue also with IBM, because think of cloud computing not as a type of virtualization, but as an approach on making resources available to a wider scope. Okay? Kaya nga ang sinasabi din ng sa industry nowadays is that you can implement cloud computing even without virtualization. Okay? In theory. Okay? But in practice, what we have already nowadays, especially on the available solutions and use cases that we have, no, most of the providers implementing cloud, almost 90% siguro, would have virtualization enabled in their cloud. Siguro dun nang gagaling yung standpoint ni IBM on why they included it as a type of virtualization. Think of it also as an amalgamation of all 9 other types. Okay? You don't necessarily need everything to support cloud computing, but you can have at least one of them, in fact. And from my visibility in the industry, no, majority of what we have for cloud computing, we implement it using CPU virtualization. Some of them would have storage and some of them would even have network. So, itong big three ang madalas na meron tayo. Okay? Now, for you to have virtualization, you need that piece of software for it. So, similarly in SDN, for you to have SDN, you need to have the SDN controller. Okay? You don't necessarily need OpenFlow to have SDN, but you can use other protocols to implement SDN. OpenFlow is just one, no? Similarly, for hypervisor, you need a hypervisor to implement virtualization. Okay, this is the critical software responsible for creating your virtual machines. Okay, the textbook terminology for the hypervisor is the virtual machine monitor, or VMM. Its responsibility is to create instances. Okay, so those instances are called virtual machines, and it prevents those instances from interfering with each other. So, example, one operating system which has one VM which has its own operating system goes down or it crashes, no? It's the role also of the hypervisor to ensure that the other operating VMs will not be affected if that given VM or if one VM crashes. So this is more of like fault management na. But this is just one capability that the hypervisor has. It can also be capable of encapsulating the different resources physically into virtual machine instances. Okay? Now, there are two types of hypervisors. So you have the bare metal hypervisor and you also have the hosted. So what do you notice yung difference between the two? No? So in type 1, so type 1 is also what's called bare metal hypervisors. Aptly named so because the hypervisor takes full control of the hardware. Okay? So it runs directly on the underlying computer's physical hardware, interacting directly with its CPU, memory, and physical storage. So in other words, if I were to put this in real life scenario, if you have a server, instead of you installing an operating system, you install a hypervisor directly. That's what's called a type 1 hypervisor. And examples of this, you have VMware ESXi, Hyper-V, and Zen Server. So pag meron kayong server lying around there and you want to create your own virtualized environment, no, you can install either of these three, no, and you essentially now have your virtualized environment. This is type 1. Now, not everybody has the luxury to have their own server installed with a hypervisor directly. Okay, that's where the type 2 hypervisor would come in, wherein the difference is that instead of the hypervisor taking full control of the hardware directly, it interacts with the host operating system, and that host OS is the one managing the hardware. Kaya ang tawag naman kay type 2 is hosted hypervisor. And some examples of these ones is VMware Fusion, Linux KVM, and for your course, VirtualBox. So VirtualBox is a type 2 hypervisor that you also get to experience on once you are already taking the course. The type 2 hypervisor doesn't run directly on the underlying hardware. Instead, it runs as an application in an OS. So the type 2 hypervisor is treated like an application.